to really affect the economy. So we'll start off with Damon, who will go through a presentation talking about the economy seems like this big force that what are the factors that contribute to the ups and downs and how things have been going for the past few decades. So, thank you.
So, good afternoon, everyone. My assignment, they told me to speak very close to the mic. Maybe I'm not supposed to do that. Is that good? Okay. My assignment today is to talk about the economy, which is the kind of thing that at 2 o'clock in the afternoon will often put people to sleep. So my job is not to do that. And to do so in the context of why it's so important to raise wages. Now, what I'm going to do for you is a little tiny piece of a educational program that the AFLCIO is rolling out right now called Common Sense Economics. We have Common Sense Economics is about these core questions of how is our economy working and for whom is it working, who's getting rich, who's getting poor. But it also branches out into important issues within that question. Issues like immigration and mass incarceration, which you'll hear about later today. My job here is to give a little frame, and then you're going to hear in some detail about what the lived experience is of what I'm talking about. But for starters, so you understand that this isn't just anecdotes, I'm going to tell you about the big numbers. And let's start with something that probably most people in this room have some familiarity with, which is, not long ago, we had a national election in 2014, last November. And it didn't work out so well from the point of view of progressives. And a lot of people sort of put out a lot of paper about why that might have been true. Why did the public vote for candidates who, so many of whom were so clearly working for the rich and the powerful? What was that about? And we at the AFL-CIO, we did a poll. We polled people in swing states. So swing states in November, swing states in November were states that were more white than America. They were states where the population was older than in America, and the states where the population was more affluent, where people were doing better than in the rest of the country. And one of the questions we asked people was, in the last year, would you say that your income is going up faster than the cost of living, staying about even with the cost of living, or falling behind the cost of living? This is a way of asking the question, are your wages going up or down? Now, this is in the 5th year of an economic recovery. So if you read the business newspapers, you'll be told, well, everything's doing great. The stock market is up, the economy is booming, the banks are happy, everything's great. But this was the answer to the question when we posed it to a group of people who were much more likely to be well off than the American public as a whole. And the answer we got back was 54% said they were falling behind. Their incomes were falling. 33% said they were staying even. And only 8% of the people we asked experienced their lives as an economic matter in terms of their paycheck getting better. And even if you set aside like a discount for grumpiness, right? There are people that generally kind of complain about the cost of prices going up and all that. Even if you set that aside, what this is telling us is that when the economy may be working for the people who talk on MSNBC, it is not working for the vast majority of Americans. And the amazing thing about this poll is that it tracks the long-term trends in our economy in a really eerily precise way. Now, what do I mean by that? We live in an economy that is built to keep working people's wages down. These numbers are not an accident. They're not something that just happened last November. They're not something that just happened last year. They're not something that just happened since the economic crisis began in 2007. Our economy is built to produce this kind of result. But it doesn't have to be that way. And what do I mean by built to produce this kind of result? Here is how the economy worked in the post-war era. This graph, a little hard to see, this graph is income growth between 1935, the beginning of the New Deal, and 1980. This graph, this chart, this pie chart shows you who got the income growth, who got the money during this time. This is a long time, by the way, 45 years. And during this period, household income in the United States went up by tens of thousands of dollars. It's a huge increase in income in the United States. And it was distributed so that most of it went to the bottom 90% of the population. So this graph, the blue part, is 70% of income growth. Went to the bottom 90% of the population. Now the top 10% got more than their share, right? They got 30% of the income growth. And the top 1%, it's a little hard to see, is dark red there. The top 1% got 7% of the income growth. Now this graph, this is the society that I was born into. Some of you were born into it. This is what people meant when they said that we lived in a middle-class society. And this is during an era, by the way, in which union density in the United States, the portion of the workforce that's in unions, was averaged around 30%. Today, it's 11%. Now, this was a society that was built to raise wages. This was a society that was built to share the gains from technology, wealth, with the majority of its people. Now, what society do we live in now? This is the way our economy works now. This is what's happened to income growth since 1997. For the last 18 years. There's been income growth since 1997. Average net incomes in the United States are about $3,000 higher than they were in 1997. But all of it, and then some, went to the top 10%. All of it. Not a majority, not most, all. In fact, more than all, because the incomes of the bottom 90% fell. And 70%, essentially the share of income that went to the bottom 90% during the years after World War II, that share has gone entirely to the top 1%. Now, this is a society we live in that is built to keep ordinary people's incomes low and to amass wealth and capital in the top 1%. Now, this is a society, this is a kind of economy that does not work except for those at the top. And not just that it does not work in terms of incomes. This is a society in which we don't reinvest in our country, in our nation's infrastructure or education. This is a society in which the top 1% use their economic power to dominate the political system, to make sure that they don't have to pay taxes. This is a society in which we do trade deals that are designed to hollow out our economy, to enrich multinational corporations and to pit workers in different countries against each other in a downward spiral. This is a society in which people who have no incomes are told, well, you don't need an income because you can borrow money from the bank. Right? Not being told, of course, that when you can't pay it back because you don't have any income, the bank will seize your home. That's the kind of society this is. And what kind of outcome does it produce? When income is distributed this way, wealth piles up in the top 1%. Let's look at what that means. The Walton family, they are the heirs of, the Walton family are the heirs of, it's supposed to work a different way, let me get this to work. Right. The Walton family are the heirs of the Walmart company. They own 60% of Walmart. There are 6 of them. There are 6 people. The Koch brothers, you may have heard of, they're an energy magnate. There are 2 of them. The other Koch, there are actually 4 Koch brothers, but only 2 of them have any real money. Altogether, these are 8 people. They could fit in those 2 empty rows right there and leave some seats left over. They have $230 billion personally. And what does that mean? It's a lot of money. It's more than you or I have. Millions, billions, trillions. What does that number mean? That number, $230 billion, is more than the total net worth of 44% of the American population. More than the net worth of over 150 million people. You take everything they own, pile it all up, it's not as much as those 8 folks. Now, by the way, it's not that they have more than the people who live east of the Mississippi. All right, the people who don't have any, the people whose assets aren't enough are spread all over the country. A very high-ranking labor official was confused about this once. So I'm going to make it clear. Now, is it any wonder that our politics are dominated by people like this? Is there any sense in which you have a democracy when these 8 people can deploy as much resources in the political process as 44% of the country? But this story doesn't even stop here. What I haven't given you a sense of is how racially coded this all is. Now, 90% of the American people means all of us. When 90% of the country's income is falling, in a sense, we are all going, all of us, but the top 10%, 9 out of 10 Americans are going through the same basic experience directionally. But it is also a heavily racially coded experience. What do I mean by that? If the Koch brothers and the Waltons are one end of the wealth distribution, here is a scandalous reality of the other end. The median income of white households, median wealth of white households. Wealth is the real measure of things. Wealth is, do you own a home or not? Do you have retirement security or not? Do you own a car? Do you have the ability to make a campaign contribution? Wealth is where power lies. Median white household in the United States in 2011 had $111,000 in wealth. That's a story that says that the typical white household, they owned their own home and they had some retirement savings. Typical African-American household, their wealth, the typical one, $7,000. As President Trump of the AFLCIO said, looking at those numbers, that's not the value of a cheap used car. Typical Latino household, little teeny bit better off. What I couldn't show you in this is that these numbers have fallen by more than 50% since 2007. Still a disgrace in 2007, but these numbers have collapsed over the last 8 years for households of color. Now, this is a story about layered race and class that is inside the story about an economy that is built to keep wages down. If we're going to have a society that is anything like the society that we tell ourselves we are, and that we say we want to be, we have to raise wages in order to have any chance of changing any of this. And inside these numbers, is the lived experience of tens of millions, of hundreds of millions of Americans who work harder and harder and get less and less. And to hear that experience, I'm going to stop and turn it over to my other panel.